Let's now finish up our graphical user interface by customizing various controls that you see up on the screen here. Now the first thing we want to do is turn all of the text views into black text. So what I'm going to do is, using my control key, I'm going to hold my control key and click on each of the text views that I have in my user interface, and you can see them getting highlighted over in the left side here as I select each one. And basically, once I've got them all selected, let me just finish doing that. Now that you see all of them selected, we can go and edit the common properties of all those text views, such as the color for the text view. So what we want to do in this case is go down to the text color property. You can see that here. And we can either hard code a color or choose a color resource if we had a color resource set up. In this case, I'm just going to set the color to black by typing #000, which is the hexadecimal representation of the color black. And when I hit enter, you can see in the graphical user interface design area here that all of our text views are now black. The next thing we're going to do is get these 10%, 15%, and 20% labels or text views into the correct columns. Now, unfortunately, the attribute that we need to modify in order to make that happen is not currently available in the properties window, so you're going to have to edit the XML directly for this purpose. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go into the XML and find this 10% text view, and then we're going to add to it the so-called layout_column attribute and specify which column that particular text view should be placed in. So that text view is called the 10 text view, and we need to basically find that here in the XML code. Now this XML code is currently very wide, so I haven't actually reformatted the code yet. You can see the 10 text view over here as I had scrolled to the right. One of the things you can do if you're having trouble reading the XML code is go to the source menu and select format, in which case it starts to format that code for you. And if I expand this a little bit, you can see now some of the nesting in the table layout and the different table rows, and then for each of the elements within the rows, it's gone ahead and formatted those as well. So here you can see at line 16 in the formatted code now we have our 10 text view, and basically we want to add another attribute to the text view's XML representation here, and that attribute is the Android. So let me type Android : and then notice it's giving me help in the IDE here with all the different attributes that I can specify at this point, one of which is the layout column, and I'm just going to go ahead and type layout_column in this case, and for that I want to set its value to 1. So notice when I type the double quote that it automatically put in the closing double quote as well. And I'm going to save this XML, and now when I go back to the graphical layout, let's just make this IDE back the way it's supposed to be, notice that the text view is in the proper column. It's now in column number 1, and because of that it forced the subsequent elements within that row to be placed into the appropriate column. Next, let's go ahead and center the column heads that we've defined here. So we're going to go into our table row 1 and select all 3 of the text views, and in order to center these we're going to use the gravity property. So let's scroll down to their gravity property, and you may recall this from the previous lesson. When you click the ellipsis button you get the selection of different gravity values. For this case we want the text to be centered, so we'll go ahead and set that and click OK. And now we've got our centered column heads. And you may recall that all of these other edit texts were centering their values as well. So let's go ahead and select all those edit texts in table row 2. Whoops. Let's try that again. Table row 2, table row 3. I'm using the control key here. And also in table row 5 we have 2 of them as well. And once again we need to set their gravity properties. So we'll go down to gravity, and we'll click the ellipsis, select center, and click OK. And now all of those have centered values as well. And as long as we have all these edit texts selected, one of the other things we wanted to do in this app is make that text a little bit smaller than its default so that we can display more digits in these edit texts without having the data within them start to wrap in the user interface, which makes the data hard to read. So the other thing that we did here is we went to the text size property for these edit texts, and we set it explicitly to 14 SP, which is a smaller size than the default, which is around 16. And once I set that, we can see that the text of these edit texts is now smaller. Now we're going to make the bill edit text and the custom seek bar span multiple columns in the graphical user interface. Now, unfortunately, the spanning capability is another one that you cannot set through the properties window. So what we're going to need to do is go back to our XML representation, and we're going to have to edit these two components directly in the XML. So let's go ahead and expand our XML view, and what we want to do here is locate the bill edit text, which is in the first table row. You can see the text view and the edit text. You can make sure that you're looking at the one with the right ID, and what we want to do here is set the Android layout span attribute. So I'll type Android : layout _ span equals sign, and for this one we want the span to be 3 columns. And when I save that and just go back temporarily to the graphical layout, you can see that the edit text is now the width of the 3 columns, columns numbered 1, 2, and 3. Also, going back over to our XML view here, we want to locate the seek bar, and for the seek bar we want to ensure that it spans 2 columns. So as you can see here, we have our seek bar, and we'll go ahead and add in the Android : layout _ span value, and for this one we want it to span 2 columns. So when I save that and go back to my graphical layout, now you can see that the seek bar is indeed spanning those 2 columns. Next, we're going to change the alignment of some of the other text views in the user interface. In particular, the text views in the left column and the total text view are all in the final app right justified within their space in the GUI, and they each have some padding associated with them to separate them from the corresponding control or controls that they're labeling. So I'm going to go back to my outline window now, and I'm going to select those text views. So in the first row we have the bill text view. In the second row we have, or in the third row actually, we have the tip text view, which I see I forgot to actually name here, so let's go ahead and edit that ID right as I'm doing it. So this should be the tip text view. So let's go and select those one more time here. So we've got the bill text view, the tip text view, the total text view in the next row, the custom text view in the second to last row, and then in the last row we have both text views that we want to do this for. And for each of these, what we would like to do is set the gravity property of them so that they're right justified. So if I go to my gravity, you can see that one of the options is right. Now they're all going to be right justified, and that kind of makes them abut the controls a little too closely. So the other thing we did is we added 5 density independent pixels of space in their padding right properties. So let's also scroll down to the P's here, where we can see there's several different padding properties. If you use just the one named padding, it puts the spacing all the way around the control. If you use padding right, it puts the spacing only on the right side of the control. So by doing that, you can see now that we get some extra space between the text of each of these text views and the controls to their right. Same thing here for the total text view as well. Now, in table row number 4, which is the 5th row here, you'll notice that the text of the text views is not aligned very well with the seek bar itself. So we're now going to work on making that look a little bit better. And to do that, we're going to change the gravity properties and other properties on the 2 text views in this row so that we can get some better alignment for each of them. So what we want to do on the custom text view here is we want to set its vertical alignment as well using the gravity property. So I'm going to go click on the gravity property and hit the ellipsis here. And not only do we want it to be right justified, we also want it to be centered vertically inside the space that's allocated to it. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And you'll notice nothing seems to have happened there. And one of the reasons that nothing seems to have happened there is that we need to set the height of this to match the parent, which is the row. So we're going to go to the layout height where it's currently set to wrap content, and we're going to say match parent instead. Now you see it's repositioned a little bit. And we want to do the same thing basically for this other text view over on the right side here. We want its height to match the parent. Oops, I selected the wrong one. I have to go up here first, excuse me. So custom tip text view, which is currently wrap content, and we want to set that to match parent. And when I hit enter, it applies that. The other thing we want to do is center it vertically, so we have to go to the gravity property and set its center vertical option. And notice that it's abutting the seek bar kind of tightly here, so we also want to put 5 density independent pixels to the left of that to make it a little bit spaced out. So we're going to go to the padding left property for this control and set that to 5 dp as well. Now you'll also notice that the seek bar itself is kind of abutting the next row. We're going to be modifying the seek bar in a moment, but to prepare for that, we're also going to set both of these text views to have some additional padding on their bottom as well. So I'm going to go select both of those text views in table row 4, and I'm going to set their padding bottom property to 5 dp just to get ready for when I set the same property here on the seek bar. So on the seek bar itself, we want to customize this control, and we want to customize it 2 ways, one of which is that we want to change the padding on the bottom of the control. The other is that we want to set its so-called progress property to 18 so that the position of the thumb on the seek bar matches up with what we're initially displaying in the graphical user interface. So we've selected our custom seek bar. Now we want to set its progress property. So let's go find that here in the properties window, and we want to set that to 18, which is the default value when this app first starts running. We also want to set some padding on the left and the right as well, so that when the seek bar is positioned all the way to the left and all the way to the right in the graphical user interface, in other words the values 0 and 100 by default, we don't want the thumb to get chopped off. So what we're actually going to do to help prevent that is add a little bit of padding on the left and right of the seek bar, and for that purpose we added 8 density independent pixels for the padding left, and we did the same thing for the padding right as well. And if you actually run this app without those padding settings, you'll see what I mean. You'll see the thumb actually gets chopped off a little bit as well. For the padding bottom, we're going to do 5 dp to make the seek bar separate itself from the next row down as well. And we're also going to set the focusable property of this seek bar to false. And the reason that we're going to change the focusable property of this seek bar to false is that when the user makes a selection of a custom tip percentage, we still want the bill total edit text to maintain the focus so the user can continue entering digits or removing digits from the bill total as they like without having to retouch the bill edit text every time. Now we have just a few more things we need to do to finish up our graphical user interface, one of which is to make sure that the user cannot edit all of these edit texts that are being used only for display purposes. So what we want to do now is select all of the edit texts in table row 0, in table row, not table row 0, table row 2, table row 3, and table row 5. And for each of these, we want to set a couple of different properties. First of all, we don't want the user to be able to give any of these edit texts the focus, so we're going to set their focusable properties to false. Separately, we don't want the cursor to ever be visible inside of any of these, so we're going to set their cursor visible properties as well, and again we're going to set that to false. And finally, we don't want these edit texts to be what's called long clickable. Basically, if you touch an edit text for an extended period of time, a menu will appear on the screen allowing you to do things like copy the text, paste text into those edit texts, etc. And we don't want those features to be enabled for these edit texts. So we're also going to set the long clickable property on each of these items, and we'll set that to false. And now the user is unable to interact with these 8 edit texts in any way other than being able to see what gets displayed in them on the user interface. Now, you may recall that the bill edit text at the top of the screen, when we touched it, showed a numeric input keypad. That's a custom keypad that only allows numeric input. So we want to actually configure that for the bill edit text. So I'm going to go select that. And what we want to do is find its input type property down here in the properties window. And you'll see that input type property. And when I select on it, notice I have an ellipsis here that allows me to select from many different values. And these different values are going to display for you different keyboards based on what you need in your app. Now, for our purpose in this app, we're going to be selecting number decimal, which allows the user to enter a number with a decimal point in it. And by doing that, we get the custom numeric keypad. If we wanted the user to only be able to enter a phone number, we could select phone. Or if we wanted to be able to enter a date, we could select date. And each individual keyboard is customized based on the locale for that user, and allows only that type of input in the using the keypad. So I select number decimal, and that's what's going to customize the keypad for this bill edit text. So now we have exactly one more thing we need to do for this graphical user interface, which is basically that we want to make sure that the controls that are in columns numbered 1, 2, and 3, the second, third, and fourth column respectively, are the ones that will grow to fill remaining space on the screen if the screen orientation changes, for example. So right now we're designing this in portrait mode, but in landscape mode, if I change that here and just expand this for a moment, what you can see is that some of the controls are growing and some of them are not. Now, depending on the version of Android that you're using, you may need to set the layout weight for some of these controls. And the layout weight basically says how should certain controls grow when space is available, or shrink when space is available. And basically we want the user interface to look like this if the user rotates the device into landscape mode. The problem is that the only way to guarantee that is by saying for each of the controls what their layout weights are, and layout weights basically designate the importance of controls with respect to occupying available space. So let me go back to portrait view here, and what we want to do is select all of these different controls in the column numbers 1, 2, and 3, and we want to set their layout weight properties. Now, unfortunately, you can't do that across different types of controls. You have to select only controls of a given type in order to set this. So we can do this one at a time, or we can do it by selecting common controls. But basically, if you select any one control and then go to its layout weight property, which is in the MISC section, so here you have layout weight, and you set it to 1 for all of these controls, again, for all of them in the second, third, and fourth column. What that basically says is that all of these controls have equal importance. And if we have more space in which to grow the GUI, or where we have less space and we need to shrink down the GUI, basically what's going to happen if we set the layout weights for all of these other controls, with the exception of the left column, to 1, is when more space is available, all of these other controls will grow equally with importance. And what that means is that, for example, these 3 edit texts will all be exactly the same width. They'd just be wider or narrower based on the amount of space that's available. And the same thing for these 3 text views. This edit text that spans 3 columns will simply continue to span 3 columns. Down here, when we set the layout weight to 1 for the seek bar and this rightmost text view, because the seek bar occupies 2 columns, it will continue to be the width of 2 columns, and the text view will continue to be the width of 1 column, but they still have equal importance. The only reason that the seek bar takes up more space is because it was told to span 2 columns. And then finally, for the 2 edit texts and the total text view in the bottom row, again, we're going to say that they all have equal importance. So what you want to do now is go for all of these different controls in the rightmost columns, not the left column, and set all of their layout weights to 1. In the left column, we're leaving them with their default layout weight of 0, which means basically they should only occupy the amount of space they require.